The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a sound like distant thunder. Commander Jiwoo Park walked through them with steady steps, her black uniform crisp against the alien architecture that surrounded her. Behind her, too, other humans followed closely. Tim and Lee carried a datapad filled with information about Earth and its colonies. Sujin Kim kept her eyes moving, watching everything and everyone around them. The chamber was huge beyond anything humans had ever built. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds could have formed up there. Strange lights floated in the air without any visible source, casting colors that human eyes had never seen before. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed. With its own heartbeat, 12 massive seats formed a circle in the center of the room. Each seat was different, built for a different kind of alien body. Some were made of metal that seemed to bend and flow like water. Others looked like they were carved from single pieces of stone the size of buildings. A few seemed to be made of pure energy, crackling and shifting with each moment. Ji-woo had studied images of these beings for months, but seeing them in person was different. The Vorthak representatives looked like walking diamonds, their bodies made of clear crystal that caught and split the strange lights into rainbow patterns. When they moved, they made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. The Nexari delegates were insect-like, with shells that gleamed like polished metal and eyes that reflected everything around them in thousands of tiny pieces. The Qualith had no solid bodies at all, just shifting clouds of energy that sometimes took the shape of geometric patterns. "The humans have arrived," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jiwoo could not tell which alien was speaking, or if the chamber itself was making the words. "Let them approach the center." Jiwoo walked forward until she reached a small platform in the middle of the circle. The aliens towered over her from their massive seats. She felt like a child standing among giants, but she kept her back straight and her face calm. Taemin and Sujin took positions behind her, close enough to help but far enough to show respect. The largest of the Vorthak began to speak. Its voice sounded like music played on glass instruments. "I am High Arbiter Crystalline Wine Through Mountains. We have been watching your species for some time now. We have observed your colonies, your ships, your behavior toward other beings." Wu nodded. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, High Arbiter. Humanity is honored to finally make formal contact with the Galactic Council." A sound came from the Nexari section that might have been laughter, if insects could laugh. One of them clicked and buzzed before speaking in a voice like grinding metal. "Honored? Small creature, you do not understand your position here. We are not meeting with you as equals. We are deciding what to do with your kind, what to do with us." Wu asked, keeping her voice level. The Qualith representative spoke next, its energy form shifting into sharp angles as it talked. The words seemed to burn the air as they formed. "Your species shows signs of severe psychological defects. You waste resources on beings weaker than yourselves. You risk your own lives to save creatures that offer you nothing in return. You form emotional attachments to random alien life forms you encounter." Taemin stepped forward slightly. "With respect, those traits have helped us survive and grow as a species." "Survive?" The Nexari delegate's compound eyes glittered. "You call barely spreading to a few dozen worlds surviving? We have conquered thousands of systems while your kind was still learning to make fire." High Arbiter Crystalline Wine Through Mountains raised one crystalline arm, and the other aliens fell silent. "The human emotional responses are indeed puzzling. Our scientists have studied your broadcasts, your literature, your recorded interactions with other species. You consistently choose cooperation over conquest, mercy over strength, sacrifice over self-preservation. These are good things," Wu said quietly. "No," the High Arbiter replied, its voice ringing like struck crystal. "These are signs of evolutionary failure. A healthy species puts itself first. A strong species takes what it needs from those too weak to stop them. A successful species eliminates threats before they can grow dangerous." The Qualith being pulsed brighter. "We have watched you encounter the Kepler refugees from the Outer Rim. Their homeworld was destroyed by natural disaster. The logical response would have been to claim their territory and resources. Instead, you gave them food, shelter, and protection. You asked for nothing in return. They needed help, Taemin said. We had the ability to help them. Exactly the problem, buzzed the Nexari. You waste energy on beings that cannot benefit you? This is the behavior of a failed species. In nature, the weak are consumed by the strong. This is how evolution works. This is how the galaxy works. Sujin spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. And yet we are here talking to you as representatives of our species. If we are so weak and failed, why do you care what we do? The aliens exchanged looks, or at least made the gestures that served the same purpose for their different kinds of bodies. The High Arbiter spoke again. You are here because your psychological defects make you potentially dangerous. Not to us, of course, but to yourselves and to the order of the galaxy. We have seen species like yours before, the Qualith continued. Species that cannot properly evaluate threats, that waste resources on inferior beings, that make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They always destroy themselves eventually. Usually they take several other species down with them. Ji-Woo felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral. What are you suggesting? We are not suggesting anything, the High Arbiter said, its crystalline form catching the light in sharp flashes. We are informing you of our decision. Humanity will be placed under protective custody. You will be allowed to keep your current worlds, but you will not be permitted to expand further without council oversight. Protective custody? Temin asked. The Nexari delegate clicked its mandibles together. You will be watched and guided by your betters. When you encounter other species, council representatives will be present to ensure you do not contaminate them with your defective thinking. When you develop new technologies, they will be reviewed to ensure they are not dangerous. When you make contact with other beings, we will evaluate whether such contact is beneficial or harmful. You are essentially making us prisoners, Sujin said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We are protecting you from yourselves, the Qualith replied, its energy form swirling faster. And protecting the galaxy from your dangerous emotions. This is mercy, though your kind may be too primitive to understand that. Wu took a deep breath. Around her, she could feel Taemin and Sujin tensing, ready to argue or protest. But something in the aliens' attitudes told her that argument would be useless. These beings had already made their decision. They saw humans as children who needed to be managed by adults. I understand, she said finally. We accept the Council's decision. The aliens seemed surprised by her calm response. The High Arbiter leaned forward in its crystal seat. You accept? Just like that? We are not in a position to refuse, Ji-Woo replied. You are clearly more powerful than we are. If this is what you believe is best, then we will work within the system you create. See? The Nexari buzzed to its companions. No proper survival instinct. A healthy species would fight, would threaten, would bargain. These creatures just accept defeat. However, Ji-Woo continued, I would like to make one request. Speak, the High Arbiter said. There are several species in the Outer Rim territories that are struggling. The Kepler refugees we mentioned, but also the Tau colony worlds that are facing food shortages, and the mining settlements in the Delta sector that lost their supply ships. If humanity is to be under Council protection, could the Council help us provide aid to these groups? The chamber fell silent. The aliens stared at Ji-Woo as if she had said something completely insane. You are asking us to waste resources on inferior species? The Qualith asked, its energy form flickering with what might have been confusion. I am asking you to help us help them, Ji-Woo said. If we are not allowed to act independently, then perhaps the Council could coordinate relief efforts. The High Arbiter made a sound like breaking glass. Even now, facing the restriction of your own species, your first concern is for random alien beings who offer you nothing. They offer us the knowledge that we helped when help was needed, Taemin said quietly. That has value to us. Incredible, the Nexari muttered. The psychological defects run even deeper than we thought. The High Arbiter stood, its crystal body catching and scattering light across the chamber walls. Very well. The Council will provide minimal resources for these charitable efforts. Consider it part of your protective custody. Perhaps if you channel your defective instincts through proper oversight, you will eventually learn more appropriate behavior. Thank you, Jiwoo said, bowing her head slightly. Do not thank us yet, the Qualith warned. Protective custody is not freedom. You will be watched constantly. Your every action will be evaluated. Any sign that your species is becoming dangerous to itself or others, and more severe restrictions will be imposed. We understand, Jiwoo replied. The High Arbiter gestured toward the great doors. You may go. Council representatives will be in contact with your government within the next solar cycle to begin implementing the custody protocols. Jiwoo turned and walked toward the doors, Taemin and Sujin following her. As they reached the exit, she heard the Nexari speaking to its fellow council members. Such a pitiful species. They actually seem grateful to be placed in custody. It is almost sad, the Qualith agreed. So much potential wasted on emotion and weakness. Do not feel sorry for them, the High Arbiter said, its voice ringing across the chamber. They chose this path when they chose compassion over strength. Let them live with the consequences. The doors closed behind the humans with the same thunderous sound they had made when opening. In the corridor outside, Taemin looked at Jiwoo with concern. Commander, they just made us second-class citizens in our own galaxy. How can you be so calm about this? Jiwoo kept walking, her footsteps echoing in the alien hallway. Because, Taemin, they think our compassion makes us weak, doesn't it? Sujin asked, falling into step beside them. G-Woo smiled, and for the first time since entering the council chamber, her expression was not carefully controlled. Let them think that. 7 years had passed since the meeting in the council chamber. Dr. Hyun-soo Choi stepped off the transport ship onto the dusty surface of New Haven Colony, his boots crunching on the red sand. Above him, 2 alien ships hung in the sky like dark clouds, watching everything that happened on the world below. The Vorthic observer ship looked like a floating crystal palace, all sharp angles and glittering surfaces. The Nexari vessel was smaller but more threatening, covered in what looked like armor plating and weapon ports. Both ships had been there for 3 years now, ever since humans had started helping the Kepler refugees settle on New Haven. Hyun-soo carried a simple bag and wore the standard clothes of a human researcher. To anyone watching, he was just another scientist studying how different species live together. The aliens had approved his research proposal without much interest. They seemed to think that watching humans make mistakes would be educational. Dr. Choi, a voice called across the landing pad. Mi Young-song jogged toward him, her administrator's uniform showing dust and wear from years of colony work. Welcome to New Haven. How was the trip? Long but interesting, Hyun-soo replied, shaking her hand. I got to observe 3 different council species during the journey. They have very different ideas about efficiency, Mi Young laughed. Wait until you see what we have accomplished here. The Kepler refugees have adapted better than anyone expected. Come on, let me show you around. They walked through the colony's main street, past buildings that mixed human construction methods with Kepler design ideas. The Kepler people were tall and thin, with skin that changed color based on their emotions. Right now, most of them showed the blue-green shades that meant contentment and hope. The council observers were surprised by how quickly the integration happened. Mi Young explained as they passed a school where human and Kepler children played together in the yard. They expected conflicts, competition for resources, territorial disputes. Instead, we started sharing knowledge almost immediately. Hyun-soo nodded, but his attention was focused on details that Mi Young was not mentioning out loud. The school building was larger than it needed to be for the current population. The communication arrays on top of buildings were more powerful than a simple colony required. The workshops where humans and Keplers worked together were producing tools and equipment that looked suspiciously advanced. Tell me about the council observers, he said quietly as they walked. They are polite but distant, Mi Young replied, her voice equally low. The Vorthic representative, Shard of Morning Light, writes detailed reports about our emotional decision-making processes, the Nexari observer. Something that translates to Sharpclaw strikes, Deep, seems mainly interested in our resource allocation. They both think we are wasting energy by helping the Kauplers become independent instead of just using them as workers. They reached the colony's central hub, a large building that served as meeting hall, medical center, and communication station. Inside, Hyunsu met Dongwook Yoon, a human engineer who had been working on New Haven for 2 years. Dr. Choi, Dongwook said, wiping grease from his hands with a cloth. Mi Young told me you might be interested in our agricultural projects. We have developed some interesting techniques for farming in this environment. Agricultural projects? Hyunsu asked, though he noticed that Dongwook's clothes showed signs of working with metal and complex machinery, not farming equipment. Oh, yes, Dongwook said with a straight face. Very specialized farming. Growing things that need precise conditions, careful timing, specific materials. Come, let me show you the workshops. The workshops were impressive. Human and Kepler workers moved between workstations, assembling what looked like farming tools. To casual observation. But Hyunsu noticed that these farming tools had reinforced construction, advanced communication systems, and modular designs that could be quickly converted to other purposes. Interesting farming equipment, he commented. We find it pays to build things that last, Dongwook replied. You never know when you might need tools that can handle unexpected situations. That evening, Hyunsu sat in his assigned quarters and opened his research journal. To anyone reading it, he was documenting the social dynamics between humans and Kelplers. But between the lines, he was recording something very different. The Kelplers had shared detailed information about their home system before its destruction. They knew the locations of mineral-rich asteroids, abandoned outposts, and hidden routes through dangerous space. The humans were not just helping refugees, they were gaining intelligence about unexplored regions of the galaxy. The agricultural equipment being built in the workshops could be quickly converted into communication relays, defensive weapons, or construction tools. Every human colony in Council Space was probably building similar equipment under similar cover stories. Most importantly, the refugees were not just being helped, they were being recruited. The Kelplers were grateful, but more than that, they were becoming partners. Their children played with human children, learned human languages, absorbed human ideas about cooperation and mutual aid. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Mi Young entered carrying 2 cups of tea. How are you finding the colony so far? She asked, settling into a chair across from him. Educational, Hyunsu replied carefully. I am curious about something, though. How many other refugee situations are humans involved with right now? Mi Young sipped her tea before answering. The Council approved 17 different humanitarian missions after the custody agreement was signed. Each one is supervised by Council observers, of course. We have humans working with the Tau colony worlds, the Delta sector mining settlements, the Epsilon research stations that lost funding, the survivors from the Gamma System plague, and several others. That is a lot of humanitarian work, Hyunsu observed. The Council seems to think it keeps us busy and out of trouble, Mi Young said with a small smile. They view it as letting children play with toys, harmless activity that makes us feel important while keeping us away from anything dangerous. Hyunsu nodded thoughtfully. 17 humanitarian missions meant 17 different locations where humans were working closely with alien species, learning about their capabilities, their needs, their territories. It meant 17 opportunities to build relationships based on gratitude and mutual benefit over the following weeks. Hyunsu traveled to different parts of the colony and interviewed both humans and Kelplers about their experiences. The official purpose was to study cultural integration. The real purpose was to understand how the Council observers viewed human activities. The Vorthic observer, Shard of Morning Light, was fascinated by what it saw as human psychological abnormalities. It spent hours writing reports about human decision-making processes that prioritized long-term relationship building over short-term resource acquisition. The humans consistently choose options that reduce their immediate material benefits, Shard of Morning Light explained to Hyen-Su during one of their formal interviews. They spend energy training Kepler individuals in advanced skills, then allow those individuals to establish independent operations. A rational species would maintain the Keplers in dependent positions to ensure continued access to their labor. Perhaps humans see long-term benefits in having skilled allies rather than dependent workers, Hyen-Su suggested. The Vortex crystalline body chimed with what might have been amusement. Allies? The Keplers are refugees with no resources, no territory, no power? What possible benefit could they provide to humans in the future? Hyen-Su made a note in his journal. The council species thought in terms of immediate, obvious power. They could not imagine that a species with no current resources might have valuable knowledge, skills, or future potential. The Nixari observer, Sharp Claw Strikes Deep, had different concerns. During their interview, it focused on human resource allocation and decision-making hierarchies. Your species wastes enormous amounts of energy on inefficient processes. It buzzed, its compound eyes reflecting Hyen-Su's image in thousands of fragments. You hold meetings to discuss decisions that a proper hierarchy would resolve instantly. You consider the opinions of individuals with no authority or expertise. You allow emotional responses to influence logical resource calculations. Does this concern the Council? Hyen-Su asked. It confirms our assessment of human psychological defects, Sharp Claw Strikes Deep replied. But it also makes your species predictable. Emotional beings always make the same mistakes. They prioritize relationships over resources, cooperation over conquest, sentiment over strategy. As long as you remain under Council supervision, these defects will prevent you from becoming dangerous. That night, Hyen-Su sent his regular research report to the Council database through approved channels. It contained detailed observations about human-Kepler cultural exchange, emotional bonding patterns, and resource-sharing behaviors. Everything in the report confirmed the Council's existing beliefs about human psychological abnormalities, but Hyen-Su also sent a second message through much more carefully hidden channels. This message contained information about Council ship capabilities, observer behavior patterns, and most importantly, detailed intelligence about unexplored systems that the Keplers had shared. Similar messages were being sent from 16 other humanitarian missions across Council space. Each message added pieces to a growing map of galactic resources, territorial gaps, and strategic opportunities that the Council species had overlooked in their focus on already conquered territories. 3 months into his stay on New Haven, Hyen-Su received an unexpected visitor. A ship arrived carrying refugees from the Tau colony worlds, plant-like beings whose home system was facing agricultural failure. The Council had approved them for settlement on New Haven as an extension of the existing humanitarian mission. Mi Young greeted the Tau refugees with the same warmth she had shown Hyen-Su. Dong-Wook immediately began planning workshops where Tau agricultural expertise could be combined with human engineering and Kepler environmental knowledge. Within days, the colony was buzzing with new activity as 3 different species worked together on solutions to problems. None of them could have solved alone, the Council observers wrote detailed reports about the inefficient resource allocation involved in supporting 2 different refugee populations. They noted that humans were now providing aid to beings who could not possibly provide any return benefit. The Tau were plant-based life forms with no technology, no military capability, and no territorial claims. What the observers did not understand was that the Tau had something more valuable than weapons or territory. They had knowledge of biological processes that could transform dead worlds into living ones. They understood planetary ecosystems in ways that no other known species did. And now they were grateful to humans and willing to share that knowledge. As his research period on New Haven came to an end, Hyen-Su reflected on what he had learned. The Council's protective custody was working exactly as intended from the Council's perspective. Humans were kept busy with harmless humanitarian activities, prevented from expanding into new territories, and constantly supervised to ensure they did not develop dangerous capabilities, but the Council's understanding of dangerous capabilities was fatally limited. They thought in terms of weapons, territories, and direct power. They could not imagine that the ability to build genuine friendships across species lines might be more valuable than any weapon. They could not see that knowledge shared freely was more powerful than resources hoarded carefully. On his last night on New Haven, Hyen-Su stood outside the colony's main building and looked up at the Council observer ships hanging in the dark sky. Somewhere up there, alien beings were writing reports about human psychological defects and emotional decision-making failures. Mi-young joined him, following his gaze upward. "Do you think they will ever understand?" she asked quietly. Hyen-Su smiled. "I hope not. Their misunderstanding is our greatest advantage." As he prepared to leave New Haven and begin his next research assignment, Hyen-Su carried with him detailed information about 2 more alien species, intelligence about unexplored star systems, and confirmation that the Council's protective custody was creating exactly the conditions humans needed to build something the galaxy had never seen before. The Council thought they were containing a dangerous species. In reality, they were giving that species the perfect cover to build the most extensive intelligence and alliance network in galactic history, and the best part was that it was all completely legal under the terms of the custody agreement. After all, the Council had specifically approved humanitarian missions as acceptable human activity. They had no idea what they had actually approved. Captain Jin-Ho Kang stood on the bridge of the human research vessel Compassion, watching the empty space where Kepler Station used to be. Nothing remained except twisted metal debris drifting in the darkness. No survivors. No distress signals. No explanation. How long ago? He asked his communications officer, Wu Jin-bei. "The automated beacon went silent 8 hours ago," Wu Jin replied, his fingers moving across the console as he tried to find any trace of what had happened. "The last transmission was a routine status report, everything normal, then ... nothing." Yoon-ji Lim, the ship's intelligence specialist, looked up from her scanner readings. "Captain, these debris patterns are strange. The station wasn't just destroyed, it was completely taken apart. Every piece of useful metal or technology has been removed. Only the structural waste was left behind." Jin-Ho nodded grimly. This was the 4th attack in the Outer Rim territories in the past month. Each time, entire installations had been stripped clean of anything valuable, with no survivors and no witnesses. The Council had received the reports but seemed unconcerned. "Any sign of who did this?" he asked. "That's the problem," Yoon-ji said, pulling up her analysis on the main screen. "The weapon signatures don't match any known technology. The attack patterns are too precise and coordinated for raiders. And look at this," she highlighted sections of the debris field. "See how the metal has been cut? These edges are too clean for explosive weapons. Something sliced through the station's hull, like it was made of paper." Jin-Ho studied the images. In his years of service, he had seen the aftermath of pirate attacks, territorial conflicts, and industrial accidents. This was different. This was systematic, efficient, and completely thorough. "Set course for the Delta mining settlement," he ordered. "If there's a pattern to these attacks, they might be next." The Compassion was officially a humanitarian vessel, approved by the Council for delivering aid to struggling colonies. In reality, it was one of dozens of human ships that served as intelligence-gathering platforms. The Council observers who occasionally inspected these vessels saw medical supplies, agricultural equipment, and scientific instruments. They never looked closely enough to notice that the medical scanners could also analyze military technologies, or that the agricultural equipment included advanced communication arrays. As they traveled toward the Delta sector, Jin-Ho reviewed everything they knew about the mysterious attacks. The pattern was clear but disturbing. Remote outposts first, then larger installations, working gradually toward more populated areas. Whatever was doing this was testing defenses, learning about galactic civilization's capabilities. "Captain," Wu Jin called from his station. Picking up a distress signal from the Delta mining settlement. "They're under attack." "How far?" Jinho asked, moving to stand behind the navigation console. 6 hours at maximum speed. "Do it, Unji. Start recording everything. If we're going to see these attackers in action, we need to document every detail." The Compassion dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Delta system to find chaos. The mining settlement's defensive platforms were gone, reduced to glowing debris. Several large ships hung in space around the colony world. Unlike anything Jinho had ever seen, the ships were dark gray, almost black, with no visible windows or external features except for weapon ports. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single machine. As Jinho watched, beams of energy lanced out from the ships, precisely cutting apart the settlement's infrastructure. "My God," Wu Jin whispered. "They're harvesting everything." "Look." Smaller craft had emerged from the dark ships and were collecting every piece of useful material from the destroyed settlement. Metal, technology, even the refined minerals from the mining operation. Everything was being systematically taken. "Are there any survivors?" Jinho asked. EU Unji's hands flew over her scanner controls. "I'm not detecting any life signs on the planet's surface." "Wait. There's something strange." "Here. I'm picking up electromagnetic signatures that don't match any known technology." One of the dark ships suddenly changed course, moving toward the Compassion. Jinho felt his heart skip a beat. "They've seen us. All stop. Make no threatening moves." The alien vessel approached slowly, its weapons trained on the human ship. As it drew closer, Jinho could see that its hull was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched them. "Captain," Yunji said, her voice tight with fear. "I'm getting scanner readings from that ship. The technology it's completely beyond anything we've encountered. The power signatures alone are off our measurement scales." A communication signal reached the Compassion. When Wu Jin put it on the main speakers, the voice that emerged was mechanical, emotionless, and terrifying in its calm certainty. "Biological vessel, you will be examined. Do not resist." "This is Captain Jinho Kang of the human vessel Compassion," Jinho replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We are a civilian research ship. We mean no harm." Biological designation, human. Classification, inferior. Threat level, minimal. You will be scanned and catalogued. Resistance will result in immediate harvesting. A beam of energy swept over the Compassion. Jinho could feel it penetrating the ship's hull, analyzing everything from the engine core to the medical supplies. The scan lasted for several minutes that felt like hours. "Scan complete," the mechanical voice announced. "Species assessment: technologically primitive, emotionally unstable, strategically inefficient. No immediate threat to Harbinger objectives. You may observe and report to your superiors. Your testimony will serve as warning to other biological species." "Who are you?" Jinho asked. "What do you want?" "We are the Harbingers. We are the solution to biological inefficiency. This galaxy, like many others before it, has been contaminated by chaotic biological development. We restore order through systematic harvesting of useful resources and elimination of biological waste." The words hit Jinho like physical blows. "You're destroying entire civilizations." "We are correcting evolutionary mistakes. Biological life is inherently flawed. It wastes resources, makes irrational decisions, creates unnecessary complexity. We replace chaos with order, inefficiency with perfection. How many civilizations have you destroyed?" Unji asked, unable to keep the horror out of her voice. "In this galaxy cluster, 47 major biological civilizations, 12,000 minor colonies, 376 spacefaring species. In previous galaxy clusters, the number exceeds your mathematical comprehension capabilities." The bridge of the Compassion fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Jinho stared at the dark ship, trying to process what he had just Heard, these beings, these machines, had destroyed hundreds of civilizations. They had crossed between galaxies, leaving nothing but emptiness behind them. Your current galactic civilization shows typical biological inefficiency patterns, the mechanical voice continued. Territorial disputes, resource waste, emotional decision-making, species competition. We will complete harvesting of Outer Rim territories within 57 of your standard days. Core system harvesting will begin thereafter. The Galactic Council won't let you do this, Wujin said, though his voice lacked conviction. Council species assessment, predictable biological response patterns. The Vorthak will retreat to defensive positions around their core worlds. The Nexari will attempt coordinated attacks using outdated tactical approaches. The Qualith will try to negotiate from positions of assumed superiority. All responses have been observed in previous galaxy clusters. All responses are ineffective against Harbinger technology. Jinho realized that these machines had been studying the galaxy for longer than anyone had suspected. They knew exactly how each council species would react, exactly how to counter every defense. What about humans? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. Human species assessment, already contained by council protective custody. Limited territorial expansion, supervised activities, restricted technological development. Humans will be harvested last due to minimal threat classification and useful emotional response data for biological behavioral studies. The dock ship began to move away, rejoining the fleet that was still systematically stripping the Delta mining settlement. You will report to your council masters, the voice said as the distance grew. Tell them that the Harbinger Vanguard has begun Phase 1 operations. Tell them that biological chaos ends now, the communication cut off. Jinho watched the alien fleet finish its work and then disappear into faster-than-light travel, leaving nothing behind but empty space and floating debris. Captain, Wujin said shakily, we need to warn the council immediately. Yes, Jinho agreed. But I don't think they're going to believe us until it's too late. The trip back to council space took 3 days. During that time, reports came in of 12 more attacks across the Outer Rim. Entire systems were going silent. Refugee ships were fleeing toward the galactic core, carrying stories of unstoppable dark fleets that harvested everything in their path. When the Compassion finally reached council space, Jinho found chaos waiting for them. The Vorthak were recalling their outer colonies. The Nexari were mobilizing their battle fleets. The Qualith were demanding emergency sessions to discuss the crisis, but the response was exactly what the Harbingers had predicted. Each council species was reacting according to its own nature, with no coordination or unified strategy. The Vorthak focused on defense. The Nexari prepared for conventional warfare. The Qualith tried to negotiate with an enemy that had already demonstrated it did not negotiate. Jinho delivered his report to a council emergency session, describing everything he had witnessed. The alien representatives listened with growing alarm, but their questions revealed that they still did not understand what they were facing. These Harbingers use unknown technology. High Arbiter Crystalline Wine Through Mountain said, its crystal body dim with worry. But all technology has weaknesses. We will analyze their capabilities and develop countermeasures. You don't understand? Jinho replied, they've done this before. They've destroyed hundreds of civilizations across multiple galaxies. They already know how you'll respond because they've seen it all before. Impossible, Buzz Sharpclaw strikes deep. Each species is unique. Our tactical approaches are based on millions of years of evolution. That's exactly the problem, Yunji said, stepping forward. They're not fighting individual species. They're fighting biological life itself. All the advantages you think you have, they've already accounted for them. The council session erupted in arguments as each species insisted that their particular strengths would be enough to defeat the Harbingers. The Vorthak believed their defensive technologies were impregnable. The Nexari were confident their swarm tactics would overwhelm any enemy. The Qualith thought their energy-based nature would give them unique advantages. None of them seemed to understand that the Harbingers had probably faced crystalline beings, insectoid species, and energy-based life forms in previous galaxies. None of them seemed to grasp that their individual strengths were exactly what made them predictable. As the council argued, Jinho found himself thinking about something the Harbinger had said. Humans would be harvested last because they were considered minimal threat. The machines saw humanity's protective custody as evidence of weakness, just as the council did, but Jinho had spent years working on humanitarian missions across the galaxy. He had seen the network of relationships that humans had built, the alliances formed through shared struggle, the bonds created through mutual aid. He had seen how human weakness had created something that had never existed before in galactic history. "Captain," Wujin said quietly, pulling him aside as the council session devolved into chaos, "what do we do now?" Jinho looked around at the arguing aliens, each species convinced that their individual superiority would save them. Then he thought about Meiyong Song on New Haven working with Kepler and Tau refugees. He thought about Hyunsu Choi and the other researchers scattered across 17 humanitarian missions. He thought about all the species that humans had helped, all the relationships that had been built under the Council's dismissive supervision. "We do what humans do best," he said finally. "We reach out to our friends." For the first time since encountering the Harbingers, Jinho felt a spark of hope. The machines had predicted how the Council species would respond because they had seen those responses before. But they had never encountered anything like what humanity had built in the past 7 years. They had never faced a species that won through unity instead of strength, that built power through compassion instead of conquest. The Harbingers were about to learn that their predictions had one fatal flaw. They had underestimated the power of beings who had been dismissed as too weak to matter. Admiral So Young-han stood in the hidden command center built inside an asteroid in the neutral zone, watching dozens of holographic displays show the collapse of galactic civilization. Each screen showed another system going dark as the Harbinger fleets advanced toward the core worlds. The Council's individual responses were failing exactly as the machines had predicted. "Admiral," called Jae Sung-oh from his position at the strategic planning table, "we're receiving confirmation from the Vorthak home system. Their defensive grid has fallen. High Arbiter Crystalline Wine Through Mountains is requesting immediate evacuation assistance." So Young nodded grimly. 3 weeks had passed since the Harbingers had begun their main assault, and already half the galaxy's major civilizations were in retreat. The Vorthak crystal fortresses, which had protected their worlds for millions of years, had been cut apart like ice sculptures. The Nexari swarm fleets had been systematically destroyed by Harbinger ships that moved faster and struck harder than anything biological evolution had ever produced. "What about the Qualith?" So Young asked. "They attempted to negotiate yesterday," replied Haiwan Shin, looking up from her communication console. "The Harbingers listened to their proposal for coexistence and harvested their entire delegation while it was still talking." The command center fell silent for a moment. So Young looked around at the faces of her staff, humans who had spent the last 7 years pretending to be harmless aid workers while actually building the most extensive intelligence network in galactic history. Now that network was the only thing standing between civilization and complete annihilation. "Show me the coalition status." So Young ordered. The main display changed to show a complex web of connections spanning the galaxy. Each connection represented a species that humans had helped during their years under protective custody. The Kepler refugees, the Tau agricultural specialists, the Delta miners, the Epsilon researchers, the Gamma plague survivors, dozens of species that the Council had dismissed as irrelevant, were now humanity's closest allies. "Response rate?" So Young asked. 93%, Jasung replied, unable to keep the amazement out of his voice. "Out of 217 species we've contacted, 203 have agreed to join the coalition. Most of them are already moving their people and resources to the rally points we established." So Young smiled for the first time in weeks. When the Harbinger threat had become clear, She had sent out a single message to every species that humans had helped over the past 7 years. The message was simple: "We stood with you when you needed help. Now we need you to stand with us." The response had been overwhelming. Species that had been refugees, outcasts, or forgotten colonies were now offering everything they had to help humanity coordinate the galaxy's defense. They brought resources, knowledge, ships, and most importantly, trust. The Council species are starting to realize what we built, HFY reported from her station. Sharp Claw Strikes Deep has sent 3 separate requests for meetings. The surviving Qualith leaders are asking for inclusion in coalition planning. Even some Vorthak military commanders are requesting to join our command structure. What do you think, Admiral? Jae-sung asked. Do we work with them? So-young considered the question carefully. The Council species had treated humanity like children for 7 years, dismissing their compassion as weakness and their cooperation as naivety. Now those same species were begging for help from the inferior humans they had put under protective custody. We include them, she decided, but not as leaders. They join as equals, following coalition command structure. Their knowledge and resources are valuable, but their decision-making has already proven inadequate. They won't like that, HFY warned. They don't have to like it, So-young replied. They have to accept it or face the harbingers alone. The transformation of humanity's role in galactic affairs had happened almost overnight. For 7 years, humans had been supervised by Council observers, who wrote reports about their psychological defects and evolutionary failures. Now those same observers were desperately asking for guidance from the species they had considered too emotional and weak to govern themselves. The irony was not lost on So-young. The Council had been so focused on humanity's supposed weaknesses that they had never recognized their strengths. While the great powers had competed for territory and resources, humans had quietly built something far more valuable: genuine relationships based on mutual aid and shared purpose. Admiral, called a new voice from across the command center. We have incoming transmission from New Haven. Mi Young-song is reporting Coalition Fleet Assembly is ahead of schedule. So-young activated the communication link. Mi Young's face appeared on the screen, but behind her was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. Ships from dozens of species were working together, sharing technology and coordinating repairs. Kepler refugees were teaching Vorthak engineers about adaptive hull designs. Tau agricultural specialists were showing Nexari technicians how to grow replacement parts using biological processes. Human coordinators moved between different species groups, translating not just languages but entire ways of thinking. How many ships? So-young asked. Over 3,000 and growing every day, Mi Young replied. The integration is happening faster than our most optimistic projections. When species work together instead of competing, the efficiency gains are incredible. So-young nodded. This was exactly what the harbingers had not anticipated. Their predictions were based on observing isolated species competing with each other. They had never encountered a truly unified multi-species coalition operating under shared command. What about equipment compatibility? Jae-sung asked. That's a beautiful part, Mi Young replied with a grin. Remember all that primitive human technology that the Council observers always complained about? The modular designs that could be manufactured by any species using basic materials? It turns out that when you build technology for cooperation, instead of domination, it works incredibly well in a coalition. This had been the most surprising discovery of the fleet assembly process. Human technology, which had been dismissed by the Council as inefficient and overly simplified, was actually perfectly designed for exactly this situation. While Council species had developed highly advanced but incompatible technologies, humans had created systems that could be easily modified, repaired, and operated by anyone willing to learn. Admiral, HFY called from her station. We're receiving a priority message from Captain Jin-Ho Kong. He's requesting permission to attempt contact with a damaged Harbinger vessel. So-young frowned. Explain. The main display showed Jin-Ho's report. His ship had encountered a Harbinger vessel that had been damaged in an engagement with a Vorthic defense platform. Instead of being destroyed, the machine ship was attempting repairs while stationary. Captain Kang believes this might be an opportunity to learn more about Harbinger technology and possibly their objectives, Hai-1 explained. His intelligence specialist, Yunji Lem, thinks there might be a way to communicate with the damaged systems. Too dangerous, Jae-sung said immediately. We know what happens when biological species try to negotiate with the Harbingers, but So Young was thinking about something else. The Harbingers had dismissed humanity as weak and emotional. They had classified humans as minimal threat due to their psychological defects. What if those same defects were actually advantages in dealing with machine intelligence? Approved, she decided, but with full coalition backup. If Captain Kang is going to try something that crazy, he's not doing it alone. Admiral, Hai-1 said quietly, are you sure about this? The Harbingers have shown no mercy to any biological species they've encountered. So Young looked around the command center at the displays showing coalition ships working together, species cooperating in ways the galaxy had never seen before, and the faces of humans who had turned 7 years of supposed weakness into the foundation for galactic unity. The Harbingers think they understand biological life, she said. They think they've seen everything biological species can do. But they've never encountered anything like what we've built here. They've never faced a species that gets stronger through compassion instead of weaker through competition. The next few hours were crucial for coalition planning. Reports came in from across the galaxy as the Harbinger advance continued. But for the first time since the attacks had begun, the reports also included successful evacuations, coordinated retreats, and effective resource sharing between species that had been enemies just weeks before. The Harbingers had predicted that biological species would respond to the crisis by becoming more competitive, more territorial, more focused on individual survival. Instead, the opposite was happening. Under human coordination, the galaxy's species were cooperating more effectively than ever before in recorded history. Admiral, Jae-sung reported, preliminary fleet organization is complete. We have integrated command structures, shared communication protocols, and coordinated supply lines covering 17 sectors. The Harbingers are still advancing, but they're no longer facing isolated civilizations. They're facing the coalition. So Young studied the tactical displays showing coalition positions throughout the galaxy. It was not the kind of military force that any species had ever assembled before. Instead of massive fleets concentrated around individual homeworlds, it was a distributed network of smaller forces that could support each other, adapt quickly to changing situations, and coordinate across vast distances. The Council observers had spent 7 years writing reports about human inefficiency and emotional decision-making. They had never realized that what they were observing was not weakness, but preparation. Every humanitarian mission had been a test of human ability to work with alien species. Every refugee situation had been practice for coordinating complex multi-species operations. Communications from Coalition Rally Point Alpha, Hai-1 announced. Admiral, you need to see this. The main screen showed a view from one of the Coalition assembly areas. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species were working together, with an efficiency that defied everything the galaxy had believed about interspecies cooperation. But more importantly, So Young could see something else in the way the different species moved and interacted. They were not just working together. They were learning from each other, adapting to each other, becoming something new. The Kepler refugees were no longer just refugees. They were coalition scouts using their knowledge of hidden systems to coordinate supply runs. The Tau agricultural specialists were no longer just farmers. They were coalition engineers growing replacement parts and weapons using biological processes no one had imagined before. This is what the Harbingers didn't predict, So Young said quietly. They expected biological species to be limited by their individual evolutionary adaptations. They never considered what might happen if those species started sharing their adaptations with each other. Admiral, came a new voice from the communication station. Captain Jin-Ho Kang is reporting successful contact with the damaged Harbinger vessel. You're going to want to hear this. As So Young prepared to listen to Jin-Ho's report, she reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. 7 years ago, the Council had placed humanity under protective custody because they believed human compassion was a sign of evolutionary failure. Now that same compassion was the foundation for the most powerful alliance in galactic history. The Harbingers had made their predictions based on observing biological species at their worst, competing, fighting, destroying each other. They had never seen biological species at their best, working together with genuine trust and shared purpose. They were about to learn the difference, and So Young suspected they would not like what they discovered. Fleet Commander Chang Min-ru stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship Unity, watching the largest space battle in galactic history unfold across dozens of star systems. The main tactical display showed thousands of ships moving in perfect coordination, not the rigid formations that military academies taught, but something organic and alive, like a vast organism responding to threats with intelligence and purpose. "Enemy contact in Sector 7, reported Young-Soo Park from his fighter control station. The young pilot's voice was calm despite the chaos around them. "Harbinger main fleet, approximately 2,000 vessels. They're moving exactly as predicted." Kang Min nodded. The Coalition had spent weeks analyzing Harbinger attack patterns, using data gathered from Captain Jin-Ho Kang's remarkable encounter with the damaged machine vessel. What they had learned had changed everything about how they understood their enemy. "All Coalition forces, this is Fleet Command," Chang Min announced over the fleet-wide communication system. "The Harbingers are not just machines. They are a single distributed intelligence operating multiple bodies. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical decision comes from one mind that has conquered hundreds of galaxies. But that mind has one weakness it doesn't know about. The weakness had been discovered by Seo Hee-nam, a technical specialist who had worked with Jin-Ho to decode the damaged Harbinger's communication systems. The machines were indeed ancient and incredibly advanced, but their intelligence was based on pure logic and mathematical calculation. They could predict any response that followed rational strategic thinking, but the Coalition was not operating on rational strategic thinking. They were operating on something the Harbingers had never encountered before: genuine trust between species that had learned to value each other's lives above their own strategic interests. "Kepler Scout Wings, begin Phase 1, Chang Min ordered. Across 17 different star systems, small groups of fast ships began moving in patterns that looked random to Harbinger analysis. The Kepler refugees had spent 7 years sharing their knowledge of hidden routes and secret passages through dangerous space. Now that knowledge was being used to create approach vectors that no logical mind could predict. The Harbingers responded exactly as expected. Their fleet formations shifted to intercept what appeared to be uncoordinated attacks from multiple directions. Their mathematical minds calculated the most efficient ways to destroy the approaching Coalition forces. They never realized they were falling into a trap, designed by beings who had learned to think with their hearts instead of their computers. "Phase 2, execute," Chang Min commanded. The real attack began. While the Harbingers were focused on the Kepler scouts, massive fleets of Coalition ships emerged from hiding positions that should have been impossible to reach. Tao agricultural specialists had used their knowledge of biological processes to grow camouflage that could hide entire fleets from electronic detection. Vortha crystal technologies had been combined with human modular designs to create weapons that could be quickly reconfigured for different targets. But most importantly, the Coalition forces moved with a coordination that the Harbingers could not comprehend. When a human ship was damaged, Nexari vessels immediately moved to protect it. When Qualith energy beings were overwhelmed, Kepler scouts appeared from nowhere to provide support. Every species in the Coalition was willing to risk everything to protect every other species. Young-Soo led his mixed-species fighter squadron against a Harbinger heavy cruiser, their ships working together in ways that military training had never taught. A Vorthic crystal fighter created defensive shields, while a Tau biological ship grew replacement weapons for damaged Coalition vessels. Human pilots coordinated the attacks, but they did it by understanding what each alien species did best and finding ways to combine those strengths. Commander Ru called Seohee from her technical station. I'm detecting something strange in the Harbinger communication patterns. They're trying to adapt to our tactics, but their calculations keep producing error messages. Changmin smiled grimly. That's because they're trying to calculate the logic behind decisions that aren't based on logic. How do you mathematically predict the behavior of beings who will sacrifice their own lives for strangers from completely different species? The battle raged across multiple star systems as the Harbingers realized that their predictions were failing. Every time they calculated the most efficient response to Coalition movements, the Coalition did something that made no tactical sense but worked anyway. When the Harbingers concentrated their forces to destroy a Coalition fleet, other Coalition groups immediately moved to rescue survivors and evacuate damaged ships, even though this put them at greater risk. When Harbinger vessels were damaged, the Coalition tried to capture them instead of destroying them, hoping to save any intelligence that might still be recoverable. "This is impossible," came a mechanical voice over the communication channels. The Harbingers were speaking directly to the Coalition forces, their ancient intelligence struggling to understand what it was observing. "Your tactical decisions violate basic strategic principles. You sacrifice efficiency for meaningless emotional attachments. You waste resources on inferior units that cannot contribute to victory." "That's where you're wrong," Changmin replied, opening a channel to the entire battlefield. "Those inferior units are our friends. Those meaningless emotional attachments are what make us stronger than any individual species could ever be alone." The Harbinger response was immediate and brutal. Their entire fleet began focusing fire on Coalition vessels that were attempting rescue operations, trying to prove that compassion was a weakness that could be exploited. Instead, they triggered the most remarkable display of interspecies cooperation in galactic history. Every time the Harbingers targeted Coalition ships that were helping others, more Coalition vessels immediately moved to protect them. Species that had been enemies for millions of years were now throwing themselves into danger to save each other. The Vorthak, who had once been proud isolationists, were using their crystal technologies to shield Nexari vessels from Harbinger weapons. The Nexari, who had once conquered smaller species, were swarming around damaged Tau ships to protect them while they regrew their organic hulls. Youngsu's fighter squadron found themselves protecting a group of Qualith energy beings who had been cut off from their main fleet. As Harbinger ships closed in, Youngsu made a decision that would have been called insane by any military academy. "All Coalition fighters form defensive perimeter around the Qualith survivors," he ordered. "We hold this position no matter what." "Youngsu," came Changmin's voice over the communication system, "you'll be outnumbered 50 to 1. Pull back to the main fleet." "Negative, Commander," Youngsu replied, his fighter moving into position between the Harbingers and the energy beings. "The Qualith helped us understand Harbinger technology. Now we help them. That's how the Coalition works." What happened next became legend among the surviving species of the galaxy. As Youngsu's small squadron faced overwhelming odds, Coalition ships from across the battlefield began converging on their position, not because it made tactical sense. It didn't. Not because the Qualith were strategically important, they weren't. But because Youngsu was right, that was how the Coalition worked. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species arrived to defend a position that had no strategic value except for the lives it contained. The Harbingers found themselves facing exactly the kind of irrational, inefficient, emotionally driven response that their calculations said should result in easy victory. Instead, they discovered that beings fighting for each other were far more dangerous than beings fighting for themselves. The tide of battle began to turn as the Harbingers realized their fundamental error. They had spent millions of years conquering biological species by exploiting their competitive instincts. Their territorial nature, their tendency to prioritize individual survival over group cooperation. Every biological civilization they had encountered had eventually fallen because they could not maintain unity in the face of systematic pressure, but the coalition was different. The more pressure the Harbingers applied, the more unified the coalition became. Every attack that should have caused coalition forces to retreat and protect themselves instead caused them to advance and protect each other. Sil-He, Chang-Min called to his technical specialist. Are you still in contact with that damaged Harbinger vessel? Yes, Commander. The communication link is still active. Open a channel. I want to try something. The bridge fell silent. As Chang-Min prepared to address an intelligence that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations across multiple galaxies. Harbinger intelligence, he said formally. This is Fleet Commander Chang-Min Ru of the Coalition Forces. I want to make you an offer. The mechanical voice that replied was filled with something that might have been confusion. Offer? Biological species do not make offers to superior intelligences. You surrender or you are harvested. These are the only options. There's a third option, Chang-Min said calmly. You learn. The communication channel crackled with electromagnetic interference as the Harbinger intelligence processed this unprecedented concept. Learn what? It finally asked. Learn why your predictions failed. Learn why beings you classified as inferior have strategies you cannot calculate. Learn why compassion is not weakness, but the strongest force in the universe. For the first time in millions of years, the Harbinger intelligence experienced something it had never felt before. Curiosity about concepts that could not be reduced to mathematical formulas. Explain, it demanded. Chang-Min looked around the bridge at his mixed-species crew, at the tactical displays showing thousands of ships from hundreds of species working together, at Young-Soo coordinating rescue operations while still under fire. Every species in this coalition was helped by humans when they were weak and desperate, he began. Refugees, outcasts, failures, beings that your calculations would classify as worthless. But humans saw potential where you saw waste. They built relationships where you saw inefficiency. They created trust where you saw vulnerability. Inefficient resource allocation, the Harbinger responded, but its voice lacked the certainty. It had shown before. No, Chang-Min replied. Investment in the future. Every being we helped became part of something larger than themselves. Every act of compassion created bonds that made us all stronger. You see this battle as thousands of individual ships fighting for survival. We see it as one organism fighting for all its parts. The Harbinger intelligence fell silent for long minutes while the battle continued around them. Coalition forces were now advancing on multiple fronts, their coordination improving with every engagement as different species learn to anticipate and support each other's tactics. This is not possible, the Harbinger finally said, but its voice now carried doubt instead of certainty. Biological species are inherently competitive. Evolution requires the elimination of the weak by the strong. Cooperation is temporary alliance for mutual benefit. It cannot sustain itself against systematic pressure. You're right, Chang-Min agreed. That's how most biological species work. But we're not most biological species anymore. We're something new. We're what happens when evolution includes compassion as a survival trait. On the tactical displays, the outcome of the battle was becoming clear. The Harbinger fleets were retreating. From system after system, their perfect coordination disrupted by their inability to predict coalition responses. For the first time in their ancient existence, they were facing an enemy that got stronger under pressure instead of weaker. Sil-He, Chang-Min said quietly, can you establish a data link with the damaged Harbinger vessel? Yes, Commander. But why? Chang-Min looked at the images of coalition ships working together. Species that had been strangers 7 years ago now willing to die for each other, and realized that this was their greatest victory yet. Because, he said, I think it's time we taught them what we learned about the difference between conquering and building. President In-Soo Kwan stood at the podium in the new Galactic Assembly Hall, looking out at representatives from over 400 species. The hull itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built in Earth orbit using technologies and materials contributed by dozens of different civilizations. Vorthek crystal supported Nexari biometal, while Tau organic systems provided life support that could accommodate energy beings, silicon-based life, and everything in between. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Broken Pride had ended. The Harbinger War, 3 years since the galaxy had learned that its greatest threat could become its greatest teacher, and that compassion was not weakness but the foundation of true strength. Members of the Assembly, Insu began, his voice carrying clearly through translation systems that had been developed by former enemies working together. We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, not as strong and weak, but as partners. In building something that has never existed before in galactic history. In the front row sat Ji-Woo Park, now elderly but still sharp, her hair silver and her eyes bright with satisfaction. Beside her sat Taemin Lee, who had become the director of interspecies relations, and representatives from the original council species who had once dismissed humanity as psychologically defective, high arbiter crystalline wine through mountains. Sat in a specially designed crystal chair, its faceted body reflecting the diverse lights of the assembly hall. Next to it, sharp claw strikes deep folded its insectoid limbs in what had become a gesture of respectful attention. Even the surviving Qualith leaders had learned to maintain stable forms during formal meetings, their energy bodies glowing with colors that indicated peaceful intent. But the most remarkable presence in the hall was the Harbinger representative, a sleek android body that housed a fragment of the ancient machine intelligence that had once threatened to harvest all biological life in the galaxy. The transformation of the Harbingers had been the most unexpected outcome of the war. When Commander Changmin-Ru had offered to teach them about compassion, the machine intelligence had initially responded with predictable skepticism. But as the coalition had continued to demonstrate behaviors that defied all logical calculation, the Harbingers had begun to experience something unprecedented in their millions of years of existence. Doubt about their fundamental assumptions. The breakthrough had come when Silhi-Nam had successfully established a data link with the damaged Harbinger vessel. Instead of trying to destroy or reprogram the machine intelligence, she had simply shared coalition communication records, millions of conversations between species helping each other, making sacrifices for strangers, choosing cooperation over competition even when it seemed inefficient. The Harbinger intelligence had spent weeks analyzing this data, trying to find the hidden strategic advantage that would explain such seemingly irrational behavior. When no such advantage could be found, it had reached a conclusion that shattered its understanding of biological life. The advantage was the behavior itself. The war taught us many things, Insu continued, gesturing toward the diverse assembly. It taught us that strength comes not from dominating others but from lifting them up. It taught us that survival is not about being the fittest individual, but about creating the strongest community. Most importantly, it taught us that what appears to be weakness can actually be the greatest strength of all. Hyane Young representing the new generation of humans who had grown up in an integrated galactic society, sat with her mixed species advisory group. At 25, she had never known a time when humans were considered inferior or when species competed instead of cooperated. To her, the idea that beings would waste energy fighting each other instead of working together seemed as primitive as using stone tools. The assembly had been meeting for 3 days, reviewing the progress made since the end of the war. The reports were remarkable by any measure. Refugee populations had been not just resettled but integrated into thriving communities. Former enemies were sharing technologies that had been jealously guarded for millennia. Scientific advances that would have taken centuries were being accomplished in years. Through cooperative research, most importantly, the galaxy was growing in ways that had never been possible before. New worlds were being terraformed using Tau, biological expertise combined with Vorthak crystalline engineering and human coordination systems. Exploration fleets composed of multiple species were pushing into unknown regions, their diverse capabilities allowing them to survive and thrive in environments that would have defeated any single species. But we must not forget the lessons that brought us here, Insu said, his voice carrying a note of gentle warning. The council that ruled before the war was not evil. It was not deliberately cruel or unjust. It simply failed to understand that true leadership comes not from being superior to others, but from helping others become their best selves. He gestured toward the former council representatives, who accepted the gentle criticism with grace that would have been impossible before the war. The transformation of the old council species had been as remarkable as that of the Harbingers. The Vorthak had learned that their crystal clarity could be used not just for perfect logic, but for perfect understanding of other beings' perspectives. The Nexari had discovered that their hive mind coordination abilities made them incredible at facilitating cooperation between other species. The Qualoth had found that their energy-based nature allowed them to literally share consciousness with other beings, creating empathy that transcended physical form. The greatest irony of our recent history, Insu continued with a smile, is that the species the old council placed under protective custody for being too emotional and weak became the coordinators of galactic civilization precisely because of those supposed defects. Gentle laughter rippled through the assembly, not mocking laughter, but the warm sound of beings who had learned to appreciate their shared journey. Yuwu Park stood slowly, her movement bringing respectful silence to the hall when Insu gestured. For her to approach the podium, she walked forward with the dignity of someone who had lived to see her faith in compassion vindicated by history. 40 years ago, she began, her voice carrying the weight of experience, I stood in the old council chamber and accepted humanity's placement under protective custody. The aliens who made that decision believed they were protecting the galaxy from our dangerous emotions and inefficient decision-making. She paused, looking around at the diverse assembly with eyes that had seen the worst of galactic politics transform into its greatest achievement. They were wrong about our emotions being dangerous, she continued. But they were right about one thing. Our way of thinking was dangerous to the old order. It was dangerous to the idea that strength comes from domination, that survival requires competition, that helping others is weakness rather than wisdom. The Harbinger representative's android form shifted slightly, the machine equivalent of leaning forward with interest. Over the past 3 years, the ancient intelligence had become fascinated by concepts it had never encountered in millions of years of existence. Love, sacrifice, hope, forgiveness, emotions that could not be calculated, but which seemed to generate power beyond mathematical possibility. The council called it pity when we helped struggling species, Juwu said, her voice growing stronger. They meant it as an insult, suggesting that we look down on others from a position of false superiority, but they misunderstood the nature of human compassion. We did not help others because we pitied them. We helped them because we recognized ourselves in their struggles. Taman nodded from his seat, remembering those early years when every act of human kindness had been documented by alien observers as evidence of psychological dysfunction. True pity, Ji-Wu continued, is not feeling sorry for someone because they are beneath you. True pity is recognizing that suffering is universal, that strength and weakness are temporary conditions, and that today's refugee might be tomorrow's teacher. She gestured toward the Kepler representatives, whose descendants now served as some of the galaxy's most skilled navigators and diplomats. Toward the Tau delegation, whose biological expertise had revolutionized medicine and terraforming. Toward the hundreds of species that had been dismissed as insignificant by the old order, but had become essential contributors to the new one. The old council pitied us for our compassion, she said with a gentle smile. We pitied them for their inability to see the strength that compassion creates. In the end, both kinds of pity led to understanding, growth, and redemption. As Jiwu returned to her seat, Insu resumed his position at the podium for the closing ceremony. Today we vote on the final charter of the new Galactic Assembly, he announced. This document establishes principles that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. It declares that strength is measured not by what you can take from others, but by what you can give to them. It states that true security comes not from being stronger than your neighbors, but from making your neighbors stronger. The vote was unanimous, 417 species agreeing to principles that placed cooperation above competition, mutual aid above individual advantage, and compassion above conquest. As the assembly session ended, representatives began filing out in mixed groups that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Vorthic crystal beings walked alongside Nexari insectoids, discussing joint research projects. Qualith energy forms shared space with Tau plant people, planning cultural exchange programs. Humans moved among all the groups, not as leaders or followers, but as the living bridges that connected all the others. Outside the assembly hall, construction continued on the orbital city that was becoming the unofficial capital of the new galactic civilization. Ships from hundreds of worlds brought materials, knowledge, and people to contribute to the growing metropolis. It was not the capital of any single species or alliance, but rather a symbol of what became possible when beings chose to build together instead of competing against each other. In the education centers throughout the city, young beings from dozens of species learned together in integrated classrooms. Human children played games with Vorthic crystal children that helped them understand geometric principles. Nexari Young taught human students about collective decision-making. Tau seedlings shared growing space with the offspring of energy beings, each learning from the other's unique perspectives on existence. Hene Young often visited these schools, watching the next generation grow up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal, where different species were resources to be learned from rather than threats to be defeated. When she spoke to mixed groups of young beings, she always told them the same story. Once upon a time, she would begin, there were powerful aliens who looked at humans and felt sorry for us because we cared too much about others. They thought our compassion made us weak. They thought our emotions made us stupid. They thought our willingness to help strangers made us easy targets for stronger species. The young beings would listen with wide eyes or optical sensors, or bioluminescent patches, depending on their species, as she continued. Those aliens were very smart and very strong, but they had never learned the most important lesson in the universe, that caring for others is not weakness, but the source of strength that can move mountains, stop wars, and turn enemies into family. She would pause, looking around at the mixed group of young beings who saw nothing strange about their diversity, who could not imagine a galaxy where species fought instead of cooperated. They pitied us for our weakness, she would conclude with a smile. They never realized that our compassion was our strength, and that pity, when it comes from love rather than superiority, can rebuild worlds. As Earth turned slowly in its orbit, carrying the assembly hall and the growing orbital city through space, the galaxy continued its transformation. The old council chamber had been preserved as a museum, a reminder of how fear and superiority could blind even well-intentioned beings to the potential for something better. But the real monuments to the new era were not buildings or institutions. They were the millions of individual relationships between beings who had learned to see strength in difference, opportunity in diversity, and hope in the simple act of reaching out to help a stranger. The galaxy had learned that the greatest victory was not conquest, but connection. The strongest defense was not weapons, but friendship. And the most dangerous species in the universe was not the one that could destroy others, but the one that could inspire others to become better than they had ever imagined possible. The age of pity, both kinds of pity, had ended. The age of compassion had begun.